right, let's dive into a really fascinating and complex story from the Book of Numbers. We're talking about the war between Israel and Midian. But this story isn't just about the battle itself. It's really about what happens after. Things like justice, the rules for handling the spoils of war, and a huge choice that ended up shaping the future for generations to come.
So that's the big question, right? What really happens after a conflict that's described as a holy war? Well, the source material we're breaking down today gives us a surprisingly detailed look. It's this incredible story of divine retribution, super specific rules about dividing up the loot, and even a debate about real estate that, believe it or not, has lessons for today.
So our story doesn't even kick off on a battlefield. It starts with a divine command given directly to Moses. See, this wasn't a war of choice or a land grab. From the very beginning, it was framed as a necessary act of vengeance.
And according to the source, you can trace this entire crisis back to one person, a prophet named Balaam. So the story goes, after he failed to curse Israel directly, he didn't just pack up and go home. Instead, he apparently came up with a much more sinister plan.
And get this, it wasn't a military assault. It was a cultural and spiritual one. The whole idea was to use Midianite women to lure Israelite men into idol worship at this, seductive festival. The goal was to basically break their covenant with God from the inside out.
And the consequences? They were absolutely catastrophic. This whole incident led to a devastating plague that just ripped through the Israelite camp. So here's the key point. The war that follows isn't presented as some random act of aggression. It's framed as a direct response, a divinely ordered payback against the Midianites, who actually carried out Balaam's scheme.
This brings us to a really important definition from the source. This conflict is called a holy war. Now, that doesn't mean what you might think. In this context, it means the objective wasn't about conquering territory or getting rich. The stated purpose was all about enacting divine justice, to restore God's glory by getting rid of the very influence that had led them astray in the first place. So, to carry out this mission, Moses puts together a force of 12,000 soldiers, and that number is pretty significant. It's exactly 1,000 men from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. It's meant to symbolize a totally unified effort from the entire nation.
The battle itself, well, it was swift and decisive. But as we're about to see, the real complexities, the real drama, all began once the fighting was over. The aftermath and what to do with all the spoils, that was governed by a very specific and very intense set of rules.
0. That was the number of Israelite soldiers lost in the battle. According to the account, it was seen as a complete miracle, a divine intervention. Not a single one of the 12,000 soldiers was killed.
But any celebration was cut short. When the army got back, Moses was absolutely furious. He chewed out his commanders because they had spared the very women who, from his perspective, were the root cause of the whole crisis. He felt like they completely missed the point of the mission.
And right after that, a really harsh new order was given. The source lays out these 3 steps. Kill every male child, kill every woman who is not a virgin, but spare all the young women who were. The stated reasoning was to completely eliminate anyone who had taken part in the idolatry that started the whole plague.
Okay, so what about all the loot from the war? Well, the text lays out this incredibly organized system for dividing it all up. It was split right down the middle, 50-50. Half went to the soldiers who fought, and the other half went to the rest of the community. Then each group had to give a portion of their share as a tribute. A tiny fraction from the soldiers went to the priests, and a larger fraction from the community went to the Levites.
And the sheer amount of spoils was just staggering. We're talking about a massive transfer of wealth. The loot included these huge herds of livestock, hundreds of thousands of sheep, plus tons of cattle and donkeys. But it wasn't just livestock. The spoils also included the 32,000 young women who were spared in that earlier command. And according to the text, they were then brought to live among the Israelites. So, after this miraculous, casualty-free victory, the army commanders came forward and did something pretty significant. They presented a special offering of over 16,000 shekels of gold. I mean, that's almost 200 kilograms of pure gold. It was an offering to both acknowledge the incredible victory and as an act of atonement.
All right, so the war is over, the spoils are all divided up. You'd think the story ends there, right? Not even close. A completely new and unexpected issue came up. And it had nothing to do with fighting. It was all about where to live. And it all started with a simple request about that newly conquered land. So you have 2.5 tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, and they were loaded with livestock. They took one look at the fertile pasture land they had just helped conquer on the east side of the Jordan River and thought, wow, this is perfect for us. So they went to Moses and asked if they could just take that land as their inheritance instead of crossing the river into Canaan with everyone else. Now, this request did not go over well at first. Moses was seriously worried it would demoralize the other tribes, but they negotiated. The tribes made a solemn vow. They said, look, we'll build fortified cities here for our families, but we promise our soldiers will cross the Jordan and fight at the very front of the invasion of Canaan, and we won't come back until the job is done. And on that condition, Moses agreed.
And this is where the source gives us this incredible historical hindsight. On one side, you see the appeal. It was a perfectly practical choice at the time. Fertile land, already conquered, ready to go. But the source points to a much harsher reality down the road. Because this region was more exposed, it suffered from constant foreign influence and invasions, and it was ultimately the very first part of Israel to fall to its enemies.
So what's the big takeaway from all this, according to the source material? It's a really powerful lesson. The story suggests that sometimes the groups who have to struggle and work to develop more challenging land end up building something far more resilient, something that endures much longer than those who take the easier, more immediately rewarding path.
And that leaves us with a question that feels just as real today as it did back then. This whole account of war and land forces us to think about that tension between a good, practical, short-term decision and a truly wise, long-term one. So when is a practical choice also a wise one? Now that is something worth thinking about.